Story 1.
I hate history class. It is boring and pointless. Who cares about what happened hundreds of years ago? I just wanted to get through it and go home. But that day, history class became the most terrifying experience of my life. It was a normal day at school. I was sitting in the back row next to my best friend Alex. We were chatting and joking, ignoring the teacher's lecture on the French Revolution. He was showing us some old paintings and documents on the projector. I didn't pay attention to them until one of them caught my eye. It was a portrait of a man in a fancy suit and a wig. He had a stern expression and a mole on his cheek. He looked familiar, but I couldn't place him. Then I realized why. He looked exactly like me. I mean, exactly. The same face, the same eyes, the same hair. It was like looking at a mirror. I felt a chill run down my spine. I nudged Alex and pointed at the screen. Dude, look at that. Doesn't he look like me? Alex looked at the portrait and gasped. Holy shit, he does. That's creepy, man. Who is he? I looked at the caption under the portrait. It said, Maximilien Robespierre, leader of the Jacobins and the Reign of Terror, executed by guillotine in 1794. I felt a surge of panic. Robespierre? The guy who killed thousands of people in the name of liberty? The guy who was beheaded by his own followers? That was me. How was that possible? I raised my hand and asked the teacher, Excuse me, sir, can you tell me more about this Robespierre guy? The teacher looked surprised. He probably thought I was joking or trying to disrupt the class, but he answered anyway. Well, Robespierre was one of the most influential and controversial figures of the French Revolution. He was a lawyer and a politician who advocated for democracy and human rights. He was also a radical and a fanatic who believed that anyone who opposed him was an enemy of the state. He led the Committee of Public Safety, which was responsible for the mass executions of suspected traitors, aristocrats, and clergy. He was known as the Incorruptible because he claimed to be guided by virtue and reason. But he also became paranoid and ruthless, and eventually lost the support of his allies. He was arrested and sentenced to death by the same instrument he used to kill others, the guillotine. The teacher paused and looked at me. Why do you ask? Do you have a special interest in Robespierre? I shook my head. No, I was just curious. Thank you, sir. I tried to act normal, but I was freaking out. How could I be the reincarnation of Robespierre? Was this some kind of cosmic joke? Was I doomed to repeat his fate? Was I going to die by the guillotine? I looked around the classroom. Everyone seemed oblivious to my dilemma. They were either bored or fascinated by the teacher's words. No one noticed the resemblance between me and the portrait. No one except Alex. He leaned over and whispered in my ear. Dude, this is crazy. You have to find out more about this. Maybe there's a connection. Maybe you have some kind of past life memory. Maybe you can change history. Maybe you can save Robespierre. I looked at him incredulously. Are you insane? Why would I want to save Robespierre? He was a monster. He deserved to die. And what do you mean, change history? How can I do that? Alex shrugged. I don't know, man. I'm just saying. This is too weird to ignore. Maybe there's a reason for this. Maybe you have a destiny? Maybe you have a mission? I rolled my eyes. Yeah, right. A mission to get my head chopped off. Thanks, but no thanks. I don't want anything to do with this. I just want to forget about it and move on. Alex sighed. Fine. Suit yourself. But don't say I didn't warn you. This could be the most important thing that ever happened to you, or the most dangerous. He was right about one thing. It was the most dangerous thing that ever happened to me. Because that day, history class became a nightmare, and it was only the beginning.
Story 2.
It all started on a Monday. I remember because I had just bombed a math test and the week was off to a terrible start. As I was leaving school, I noticed something odd about my locker. The combination lock, which I always made sure to spin a few times after locking, was sitting perfectly aligned as if someone had just opened it and left it like that. I figured maybe I was distracted and forgot to scramble it in my rush to leave after the test. Shrugging shoulders, I grabbed my stuff and headed home. The next day, I sat down with my friends at our usual table and found a note under my tray. It was a simple piece of notebook paper, folded neatly, with my name written on the front. Inside, it read, "Watch your back." No signature, no hint of who it could be from. My friends thought it was a joke, some attempt to freak me out. I tried to laugh it off with them, but the pit in my stomach suggested otherwise. By Wednesday, the feeling of being watched was almost palpable. I caught glimpses of shadows out of the corner of my eye, turning to find nothing there. The note's warning echoed in my mind, making me jump at the slightest sound. It was as if the air around me had become charged with a silent, unseen threat. On Thursday, the climax of this strange series of events occurred. I was alone in the chemistry lab, making up an experiment I had missed while sick the previous week. The room was silent except for the bubbling of beakers and the occasional hiss of a Bunsen burner. That's when the lights flickered and went out completely. The emergency lights kicked in, casting an eerie glow over everything. I tried to keep my cool, telling myself it was just a power outage. That's when I heard it, a clattering sound from the other end of the lab. Heart pounding, I slowly made my way toward the noise, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination running wild. What I found was impossible. Every single locker in the room was wide open, contents spilled out onto the floor as if someone had rummaged through them in a hurry. But that wasn't the weirdest part. In the center of the chaos was my chemistry book, open to a page I had never seen before. It contained an experiment that seemed to describe exactly what was happening around me. The flickering lights, the feeling of being watched, even the note. I grabbed the book and ran out of there as fast as I could. Once home, I tried to make sense of it all. The experiment in the book was a simple demonstration of how certain frequencies can cause physical reactions, like making objects move or creating auditory hallucinations. It suggested that under the right conditions, someone could be made to feel watched or threatened without anyone actually being there. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. Someone had been using this knowledge against me, manipulating my environment to make me feel paranoid and scared. But who? And why? The next day at school, I confronted my closest friends about it. After seeing the genuine concern and confusion on their faces, I knew they weren't involved. We decided to keep an eye out for anyone acting suspiciously, but nothing came of it. Eventually, the strange occurrences stopped as abruptly as they had started. I never found out who was behind it or why they targeted me. Maybe it was just someone's idea of a twisted prank, using their knowledge of science to mess with me.
Story 3.
Oh, it all started on a Tuesday. The kind of Tuesday that blends into the background of your life. So ordinary you'd never pick it out in a lineup of days. That morning, I grabbed my backpack, downed a bowl of cereal, and headed out the door. Just like I always did. The only thing that set this day apart was that Jamie didn't show up for school. Jamie was the kind of student who was hard to miss. Always had her hand up, always had the answer. We weren't close, but we'd worked on a project together once. She was nice, a bit quiet maybe, but nice. When she didn't show up for first period, no one thought much of it. But by lunch, whispers filled the cafeteria. By the last bell, rumors were wildfire. The story that got the most traction was that Jamie had been seen walking into the old Henderson place after school the day before. That house had been empty for years, the subject of every ghost story we whispered at sleepovers. They said it was haunted by Old Man Henderson himself, angry at the world for forgetting him. I didn't buy into the ghost stories, but Jamie's disappearance nagged at me. After school, I went to the Henderson place. The setting sun cast long shadows, making the house look even more unwelcoming. Taking a deep breath, I pushed open the creaky gate and walked up to the front door. It was unlocked. Inside, the air was stale, dust motes dancing in the slivers of light that pierced the gloom. "Jamie?" I called out, my voice sounding small. No answer. I explored the ground floor, finding nothing but old furniture and layers of dust. It was when I ventured upstairs that things got weird. Not ghost story weird, just odd. In what looked like it used to be a bedroom, I found a setup that screamed, "Teenage hideout." There were posters on the walls, a stack of school books on the floor, and a sleeping bag in the corner. And there, sitting cross-legged on the floor with her back to me, was Jamie. "Jamie!" Relief flooded me as I rushed over to her. She turned and I saw she had earbuds in. Pulling them out, she blinked up at me. "What are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same thing," she replied, looking a bit embarrassed. Turns out, Jamie had been using the Henderson place as a quiet spot to study away from her chaotic household. She'd found a key in the garden a while back and discovered that the rumors about the house being haunted kept her siblings and their friends well away. "But why didn't you come to school?" I asked. Jamie's face fell. "I fell asleep here," she admitted. "When I woke up, it was already late. I was so freaked out about missing school and how my parents would react, I just stayed here. I've been trying to work up the courage to go home." It was such a simple explanation. No ghost, no abduction by spirits, just a high school student overwhelmed by pressure and expectations, seeking a quiet corner to call her own. Together, we walked back to her house. Jamie's parents were frantic but overjoyed to see her safe. The story of her disappearance became legend at school, growing more fantastical with each retelling. But Jamie and I knew the truth. It wasn't a tale of horror or mystery, just a strange chapter in the life of an ordinary high school student.
Story 4.
I'm a high school teacher, been at it for nearly a decade now. You think you've seen it all, but this year, something happened that I still can't quite wrap my head around. It's about one of my students, let's call him Alex. Alex was a quiet kid, kept to himself mostly. He wasn't the type to cause trouble or stand out in any particular way. That's why it caught my attention when he started acting strange. It was subtle at first. He'd answer questions I hadn't asked, or he'd stare off into space with this intense focus as if he was listening to something no one else could hear. I figured maybe the kid was going through some stuff at home, so I decided to keep an eye on him, maybe reach out if it seemed like he needed someone to talk to. But before I could, things escalated. One day during a lesson, Alex suddenly stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. The whole class turned to look at him. Surprised by the disruption, he just stood there for a moment looking confused. Then he said, "I need to leave. They're waiting for me." And without another word, he walked out of the classroom. I followed him out, concerned and a bit bewildered. I found him standing in the hallway, staring at a locker that wasn't his. "Alex," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "What's going on? Who's waiting for you?" He looked at me then, and there was this clarity in his eyes that hadn't been there before. "I don't know," he said, "but they've been calling me here. I can hear them." I didn't know what to make of it. There was no one around but us. The hallway was empty and silent except for the distant sound of a class in session somewhere down the line. I convinced Alex to come back to class, promising we'd talk more after school. But when the final bell rang, he was nowhere to be found. I checked everywhere, asked around, but it was like he'd vanished. The next day, Alex was back in class like nothing had happened. When I pulled him aside to talk, he had no memory of the previous day's events. He looked at me like I was making it all up. Things went back to normal for a while after that, but then other students started reporting weird incidents. Books falling off shelves for no reason, lights flickering on and off, sounds of someone walking in the empty halls. It was all harmless stuff, but it created this eerie atmosphere at school. I started doing some digging, talking to other teachers, looking through old yearbooks. And I found something interesting. About 20 years ago, there was another student, much like Alex, who had experienced similar incidents. He'd claimed that the school was alive and that it spoke to him. Eventually, his family moved away and the stories faded into school legend. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was a connection between what happened then and what was happening now. But before I could figure it out, Alex transferred schools. His parents said they were moving for unrelated reasons, but I wondered. After Alex left, everything stopped. The weird occurrences, the strange atmosphere, it all went back to normal as if nothing had ever happened. I still think about Alex from time to time, wonder if he's okay, if he's found peace somewhere else. And sometimes, when the school is quiet and I'm alone in my classroom, I can't help but listen a little more closely, half expecting to hear something calling out to me. But there's never anything there. At least, not yet.
Story 5.
It was just another day in high school, and I was stuck in the gym with the rest of my class, waiting for Coach to show up. He was always late, but today he was even later than usual. We were all just hanging around, some shooting hoops, others chatting in small groups. I was sitting on the bleachers trying to get through another level on my game when I heard it. The sound of a basketball bouncing, but it was coming from the storage room. Now, our school's gym storage room was always locked unless Coach was getting equipment out. It was weird, but I figured maybe Coach had finally arrived and was getting stuff ready for us. I nudged my friend Steve, who was sitting next to me, lost in his music. "Hey, did you hear that?" I asked, pulling one earbud out of his ear. "Hear what?" Steve looked at me, confused. "The ball, from the storage room." I gestured toward the closed door at the far end of the gym. We both stared at the door, and sure enough, the sound came again. Thump, 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 like someone dribbling slowly. Steve shrugged. "Maybe Coach is in there." But just then, Coach burst through the main doors, red-faced and panting, apologizing for being late. So, if Coach was just arriving, who was in the storage room? Curiosity got the better of us. We made our way over to the door, the rest of the class too preoccupied to notice. The dribbling stopped as we got closer, which only made us more curious. I tried the handle. Locked, as expected. "Maybe it's a rat," Steve joked. "A really big one." "Yeah, a rat playing basketball." I laughed. But we were both a bit unsettled. We decided to forget about it and headed back to join the others when suddenly, a loud crash came from the storage room, like shelves collapsing. That got everyone's attention. Coach frowned and hurried over with his keys to unlock the door. We all crowded around as he swung it open. The room was a mess, balls and equipment everywhere, but no sign of anyone or anything that could have caused it. Coach was baffled, muttering about vandals as he started to clean up. But how could vandals have gotten in and out without anyone seeing? And why would they just mess up some sports equipment? The rest of the period went by without further incident, but Steve and I couldn't shake off the weirdness of it all. After school, we decided to do some sleuthing. We talked to Janie, who worked in the office, to see if anyone had reported anything strange or if there had been any recent break-ins. Nothing. On a hunch, we went back to the gym. The door to the storage room was slightly ajar. Coach must have forgotten to lock it in his rush to get us started on drills. We stepped inside, scanning the room for anything out of place. That's when we noticed the small window high up on the wall. It was slightly open. Too small for a person, but maybe not for... "A ball," Steve said, following my gaze. We grabbed a ladder from the corner and climbed up to take a closer look. And there it was. The explanation for our ghost. A nest of birds had made their home right outside the window. One of them must have found a way in through the small opening and caused the havoc in its panic to escape. Relieved and amused at our wild imaginations running away with us, we secured the window and cleaned up the rest of the mess so Coach wouldn't have to. We decided not to tell anyone about our discovery, letting the mystery of the haunted gym storage room become a legend among our classmates.